What's up, guys? We are back with another Super 7 Ultimates review, and this time it is an SDCC exclusive review for 2023. We're taking a look at my first, not the first, but my first Godzilla Ultimates from the Toho line. Of course, there was going to be a Godzilla exclusive this year with Wave 1 coming out, and this is the Art Adams Dark Horse Godzilla from the mid-90s, so the comic book, the US comic book, and it, of course, is plastered with his artwork all over it, so I already like this packaging design. It is a massive, massive box, though. This thing is humongous. It's deep, it's wide, it's long, it's the whole thing. It is a very, very beefy package, and you've got the slipcover with the artwork for King of the Monsters #1. So wrapping around it, Godzilla going crazy. He's got the blood all over his mouth. Of course, you pop that slipcover off, and then you've got your figure there in the big window. Got him there with his tail lingering in the background. And then the back of the box showcases more art from that issue. So you can get an idea of what the art looks like for the book, as well as a bit of a bio for what's going on as well. So yeah, let's do it. Let's pull them out and take a look. And here we go, out of the package, our Ultimates SDCC Dark Horse Godzilla figure. Again, this is the first Ultimates Godzilla that I've gotten my hands on. I don't have Wave 1 yet, so this is new territory for me. The first questions that come to mind immediately are, how does this compare to NECA? How does this compare to Monster Arts? And we're gonna do that. I'm going to say, right off the bat, it is fairly comparable to both, but it's also different in some pretty significant ways. The first of which is that it's definitely a larger scale figure. This is bigger than Monster Arts, and it's bigger than NECA. It may not look like it at first, but when you get them side by side, it's quite obvious that this thing has some heft and some size to it. There are some things that I would have liked to have seen different or maybe better here, but it's a pretty solid figure right out of the gate. So let's see what he can do, see how he moves around. He's fairly comparable to other lines, but he's also not in some ways too. So we've got a head that can look up, and he can look down pretty good. You've got tilt side to side. The collar around the neck, if that's what you want to call it, is also articulated. So the head itself can move, and then the neck itself can also move to add a little bit more movement. It's not perfect. I would have loved to have seen more range there. Arms have a really good range for a Godzilla figure. The arms are really nice. That's one area where things are usually a little locked down. So these function more like normal action figure arms, something that's not a Godzilla. You got a bicep swivel. We've got a single jointed elbow here. And there's full 90 degree on that, which is really solid for a Godzilla figure. Again, you've got wrist hinge and rotation. The one area that I'm really unhappy with articulation is the torso. It's just a swivel. Thinking about maybe the later NECA figures, maybe all of them, I don't even remember at this point, but they had actual ball jointed hips, waist, well, it'd be a waist. And they could crunch forward and backward. This guy cannot. He doesn't have any crunch. I'm not happy about that. The legs go out a little bit, and this is the thing with most Godzilla figures. They really don't ever do much more than this, and this is fairly consistent. Legs go forward. You can sort of shimmy them, but there's not exactly a thigh twist there. You've got some really, really, really tight knees on this guy, which I suppose are probably good. So you've got a single jointed, I don't even know what degree that's going to be, and then you've got rotation down there. We've got hinges, and you've got a little bit of rocker action at the ankles. The major player on this figure, though, is going to be the tail, and it's pretty nuts. I will say, however, I do find the tail to be a challenge. Not necessarily in the sense that it's hard to pose, but it's really, really heavy. It's at least as heavy, if not heavier, than the figure itself. It's gonna pull it down, and that's going to be maybe an issue. It is also, as you can see right here, this thing is going to be difficult to display in some ways. And I know everybody's collection and display situation is different. This thing has some serious depth. I mean, even with the tail fully up, that's still 10 inches deep at least. This tail is absolutely enormous. It's humongous. And I mean, obviously it should be. That's one of the key characteristics of Godzilla. This thing is freaking huge. It connects via ball peg, and you'll have to put it on. And one thing I will note is I did not have to heat this thing up in any way to get anything to move, nor did I have to heat it up to get the tail on, which was always a thing with NECA figures. And it has this sort of two-stage system here. So you've got it here if you want to be able to drop the tail down a little bit more, but then you can sink it back in and it will sort of, sync up to the figure itself. It does help. It looks funny from the back when you sort of pull it back a little bit, but when you got it displayed, it does help to get a little bit more range out of this tail. If you have it out like this, it allows the tail to shimmy side to side a little better. And then this thing is just a series of ball pegs. So there is no bendy wire or anything like that here. It's very, very tight, not in the sense that I'm worried about it, but in the sense that it's sturdy. So it does hold its shape pretty well once you move it. So it's segmented, it twists and swivels all over the place, and then it will allow you, to wrap it around the figure. Like, you can get it all the way in front of the figure if you want, stuff like that. There is, this is always a limitation with Godzilla figures. You can only ever do so much with any figure and its tail. I do think this moves pretty well. I'm fairly happy with it overall. It's really big. There's a lot of joints to work with, and there's a lot of stuff to move and display. But the ability to have, you can hear how creaky it is because of all that plastic sort of jutting against itself. But this thing does have some pretty decent range. It's just a lot of plastic to articulate. It is a big old tail, so there's a lot of joint work in there that you're going to have to move around. Not in the sense that it's a problem, just in the sense that you're going to have to do it if you want to play with this guy. So he is fairly well articulated. If anything with this figure, the only thing I really wish was changed is that waist situation. I feel like if he could crunch forward a little bit better, or really, it would have helped with balance with the tail, and just to be able to get him to do something a little bit more dynamic. But otherwise, pretty solid. I like the head. I like the arm range in particular. There's no issues with arms on this guy. You can actually functionally use them. And then the legs are fairly comparable across what I normally expect to see with a Godzilla figure. Now, as far as the overall look and feel on this thing, I think overwhelmingly this is a pretty solid looking Godzilla. There is a ton of sculpt on this thing. It's got a lot of paint. And in general, I just think it looks cool. I like this particular version of Godzilla. I remember reading this comic as a kid, so it sort of does the nostalgia thing for me. Not exactly, but it's kind of there. Godzilla always works for me anyway. But I think overwhelmingly, the size on this figure is really what's going to do it for a lot of people. This is a really chunky, beefy figure, and, of course, it's super long. Now, that does present some display challenges, I'm sure. I'm 100% sure of that. But it's a really nice looking figure. This thing is, again, covered in sculpt from head to toe to tail, whatever you want to call it. Everything is textured and everything is painted too. So literally every nook and cranny on this guy does have some paint, does have some wash. So it does help to bring out that sculpt quite a bit. It does have a little bit of a shine, but it's not overwhelmingly shiny like some other Ultimates can be at times, so I think that's relatively okay. I like the spines on the back of this one. They're big and bulbousy. They've got some nice shading on them as well. They fade from that black to dark green to light green, sort of teal color. You've got the claws that are painted, so those are nicely differentiated from the rest of the body. The tail is, again, going to be a big focal point on this guy because, it's huge, it's massive, and it does have some pretty decent posability. This is nuts. The tail, even pointed up, is almost as tall as Godzilla is itself, so that gives you a pretty good indication of just how big and kind of, ridiculous this thing is. So it does have some pretty wild proportions and size, but I think that's kind of part of the charm on this figure also. My main focal point for this one, though, is undoubtedly the head sculpt, and specifically the paint on the head sculpt. The eyes, in particular, give it a very cartoon, comic look and feel, and that, obviously that's not for every Godzilla. That should not be the case for every Godzilla, but it is the case for this one. And I think it works to this figure's benefit because the eyes are incredibly sharp and piercing with that yellow and the red. They pop against the green, and you've also got more of that different green color up on the top with the small spines that run back. Not to mention the fact that you can see that full mouth of teeth, which are accentuated by the red wash in there for the blood, so those look really good. And then he has all of this, dark blood that's running down the mouth, the chin, and the neck, which is obviously, part of the idea based on the cover and the artwork that they're going for with this one. And I think it works really well. It breaks him up a little bit, adds a little bit of a different finish around there too, so it's a super shiny. It's got almost a wet look to it, if that works. And I think the head sculpt here is the defining thing as far as the visuals go for me. It really sets this one apart, specifically just because of those colors. The yellow is really piercing, and I think it helps to make him pop and stand out a little bit more. Of course, the tail is the other side of things. It's got a really cool head sculpt, but then it's got these crazy proportions, and it's got this tail that sticks out a mile from his Godzilla butt. But yeah, he's a pretty solid looking figure. I'm really curious to see more of these. Again, this is the first one I've gotten my hands on, so I'm really curious to see more of these, specifically the actual Bio Goji figure from Wave 1. I'm really curious to stack these up next to each other and kind of see how they play off of one another, and then, of course, more figures down the road. So this is a pretty cool one to get a start with. Now, as far as some size comparisons go, I would love to run the gamut across all sorts of different Godzilla, but we would be here all day. So we're going to do one from each of the major players as far as the collector space goes. So we've got our Super 7 here in the middle. We've got the poster Godzilla from NECA. This is one of their later figures, just to keep it as close to current as possible. And we've got the Bio Goji from Monster Arts here on the left. And I mean, it's quite obvious. The Super 7 absolutely dwarfs them. He is bigger in every respect than both of these figures. The NECA one is still pretty comparable, but even he is like, seems like he's in a different scale. And the Monster Arts is, I mean, that might as well be, a little baby Godzilla by comparison. Now, what I think is kind of cool to do beyond that is to maybe turn them on their sides and do something like this. So the Monster Arts does have a really crazy tail, and it's basically as long as the Super 7, but you can see like it's an entirely different situation when it comes to sizing on these two. The scale on this is pretty ridiculous. And then if you do the NECA alongside him, he's incredibly small by comparison when it comes to the tail. Now, I know different Godzillas have different tails when it comes to the NECA stuff, so, your mileage may vary on that, but this also gives you a pretty good idea of exactly what we're dealing with here. This is a really big figure from top to bottom, front to back, side to side. This line is huge. And let's take him away, and let's do some other stuff as best we can. Best see what we can actually fit in here with him. So let's put him right there. And here is Monstar. So this is what I'm talking about. He's not the biggest figure from top to bottom, but he's still pretty close. I mean, he comes up to Monstar's bicep. That looks ridiculous. So you've got a really, really big figure. Monstar is really in a league of his own still. Let's pull him aside and we'll do some more normal size comparisons. So here's a Mezco. There's Conan. And here is Mumra from Super 7. That's a pretty good comparable figure there. They're very, very close. But of course, Godzilla is still a larger figure. And let's take Conan aside and let's do a Mythic Legions. Here is Atlas for a normal 1.0 Legions figure. Let's take Mumra aside and let's do one more. Let's just do a Marvel Legends. So here is Forge for a standard Hasbro figure. So this gives you a pretty good idea. Like this is a really good interpretation here of exactly how big he is. He's super thick, super chunky, super beefy. He's, again, really big, top to bottom, front to back, side to side. But he is going to make all of the other Godzillas you've got from NECA, and of course Monster Arts in particular, look small by comparison. Now, as far as accessories goes, this figure has some, doesn't have a lot, and I know there's going to be like probably the conversation around, well, this is an expensive figure, why doesn't he have more? And just, taking back maybe to that Monster Arts that I showed, it's around the same price, a little bit more, I think, and has no accessories. So this guy does come with some, it's just not a great deal of them, so I'm happy to get something. We do get a really solid extra head sculpt. It's just the mouth being open, but you can see more of those teeth. You can see the tongue. The expression seems to be a little bit different, and I actually do prefer this head. I will note that the heads swapped super, super easy on these guys. I had no need for heat. I suppose there's going to be maybe a conversation or argument around why doesn't the head just have an articulated jaw? And I kind of like it this way because then the head has no, you got no hinges there, so it's a little bit more seamless. We do get some extra hands, so you get like the sort of grasping hands on them in the box. We get a set of style posy hands, clawing hands. You get a set of those. Of course, that's a 2. And then you get a set of fists. So there's 4 extra hands. So I'm happy just to get some extra hands. That's nice on its own. And then we get this little dude here that you can have Godzilla hold that is just ready to die, I'm sure. He's about to be annihilated by Godzilla. Put him in his mouth or something like that. He is very much unhappy. So this is kind of like what they do with the Power Ranger Zords, where you get the little Ranger to go along with them. You get a little dude here for this guy. And then lastly, the one area that I wish we had something. Accessories. I wish he had an atomic breath. And I'm probably going to say this with every figure that doesn't have something like that. Godzilla figures, to me, across every line, should always come with atomic breaths. And they routinely do not, no matter what brand it is. Monster Arts, NECA. NECA does have some. Monster Arts doesn't really have any. You'd be lucky to get most of anything with those. So I really would have loved to have seen an atomic breath. I'm sure I can make do with something else, but I wish every Godzilla would have them. It feels like a prerequisite to me, and it's something that we just don't get here. I do like what we do have, though. I really like this head sculpt. Again, that's my preferred head here. I like the hand options, and as stupid as this is, I do like the little guy. So yeah, overall, I think this is a pretty solid Godzilla figure, and again, I'm really curious to see more of this line. This is a good example of an SDCC exclusive. This should not be in the main line, and it's just a variant, basically. So it's ripe for the picking when it comes to an exclusive, so I think that worked pretty well. These guys are huge. I'm really happy to see that they are so big despite the challenge that it may present when it comes to actually displaying it. Articulation is pretty solid. I wish there was more at the waist, but articulation is pretty solid overall. But size, the heft, and the overall look of this guy, I'm very happy with. I do wish he came with an atomic blast. I feel like every Godzilla should come with them, and they usually don't. And then, of course, we do have the aspect of price here. This is on the high side. Even for Ultimates, we are in the Monster Arts territory, so I know that may be a sticking point for a lot of folks, but I think this is a really solid entry in the line. And again, I'm really curious to see more of these, and I'm excited to see non-Godzilla monsters in this line down the road. So that's going to do it for this look at the Super 7 SDCC exclusive Dark Horse Godzilla. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.